Hello, this is Joe Welinske, and I'm one of the organizers of the annual Northwest TechCom Conference, which is coming up in September, and I get a chance to speak with some of our various speakers. Today I'm meeting with Randy Nichols. Hello, Randy. How are you doing today?
Hi, Joe. I'm good. How are you?
Everything's pretty good. I'm in Seattle. Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in my office here in Tacoma, Washington, at the University of Washington, Tacoma.
All right. Well, you are one of the faculty members right where our conference will be taking place on the beautiful UW Tacoma campus. But why don't you talk a little bit about your background and the nature of your work?
Certainly. So I'm an assistant professor here at University of Washington, Tacoma in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences. My PhD is in Communication and Society from the University of Oregon. And I've been teaching for quite a while at a number of universities. So I taught at a school in Western New York, at a school in Massachusetts just outside of Boston, and now here at UWT. My work is on what's called the political economy of communication, and what I focus on really is the political economy of video games. What all that means is that I look at how video games are produced, the kind of policy impacts of them, the way in which the production of games actually has implications beyond economics, so the idea that it actually might influence politics, that we need to think about the policies that are involved. And the last couple of projects I've worked on, the two books that I've published, have really been about trying to understand the industry and the nature of work within the industry.
Well, I think most of us, our experience is either playing with our video games or trying to figure out what our kids are doing so long and often with their video games. But it's interesting to think about doing research in this area. Are there any particular things you're working on that you're particularly passionate about, or might want to share with us?
So I'm working on a couple of projects right now. The one that's most closely connected to the conference is I'm looking at the way in which the algorithms of video games actually help us reinforce a particular value. And this is what I'll be presenting on. The way in which when we construct rules, when we construct sort of ideal path through a video game, that actually reinforces a belief system. And sometimes that's conscious. So if you think about games like SimCity, I put forth a kind of conscious view about what it means to manufacture, to run a simulated city. But oftentimes, nobody has really thought about the implications of those algorithms. So you think about what happens in a game like Grand Theft Auto, or even something like Call of Duty, right? The ideal pathway through those games is always predicated on a particular solution to a type of problem. And so that's the first big project I'm working on right now, to try and think about algorithms in a way that's slightly different than I think what most other scholars are doing, which is really to talk about algorithms in relationship to big data. So how an algorithm brings something to you when you want it. Algorithms in video games work very, very differently, but there's not been a lot of discussion on that. The other project I'm working on is trying to think about the nature of thinking about genre for video games. We've got a long history of the idea of genre in literature, genre in films. For people studying video games, we haven't thought very much about that. And really what we've tried to do is come up with classifications of genre. But that's not really the way genre generally works. So even in film, something like a Western is a kind of mutable, transitioning genre. So think about what a Jimmy Stewart Western looks like, or those old John Ford films, versus what Clint Eastwood Westerns look like. You recognize them both as part of the same category, but there's some mutability. And so I'm trying to think about what genre would look like in video games and how we actually can take advantage of that mutability idea to say something different.
I was thinking about something related to kind of the work that I do and how it applies to video games, which is that I like to think that I approach my work as a storyteller as much as possible, even within the domain of technical communication, but I was wondering how you see the best way of bringing storytelling or any communication narrative into that video game environment. I was wondering if you've noticed any best practices, how to go from the starting story on a paper outline, a digital outline, to turning it into this multimedia experience.
I don't know that I know a best practice for that. My work hasn't looked so much at the process of crafting stories. The one thing I will say about it is that I think it's really important to try and be mindful that you're telling a story and to think about very clearly why you're making the storytelling choices you do. So one of the things that became really clear from interviewing people in the industry for the last book was the reminder that of something we really probably all should remember, that in something like video games, the same way in film, there are no accidental choices. Everything has to be there because somebody chose for it to be there. But we don't always think about why we're making the choices we've made. And so as you're designing, as you're trying to think about the narrative, as you're trying to think about who you're representing or what you're representing, the best practice I would suggest is to be very, very clear about why you're making the choice you are, particularly when it seems like an easy decision. That in those moments where you just sort of default to something, take a minute and think about why you've defaulted to that, and then see if that actually impacts the story, if you can actually tell a deeper story by making the change or by making that choice more explicit and grounded.
Well, you alluded to your books. Why don't you just let us know what those are? So if people are interested in looking that up, they can check it out.
So the first one is called The Video Game Business. Came out in 2014. And the second one, I actually always mess up the title, so I apologize. I'm going to wheel back and grab it. Academics always want a colon after the title. So it is Inside the Video Game Industry. Game developers talk about the business of play. And that one came out in 2016. So I think that one of the two is probably the more fascinating read because it really is people in the industry telling their own stories, whereas the video game business is me kind of looking at the macro level economics. And because it's an economics book, it's already, by virtue of coming out in 2014, it's already slightly out of date because the industry has moved on.
Oh, well, I'll look forward to checking that out myself and seeing you at our event coming up September 7th and 8th. So thanks for taking the time to chat with me a little bit and sharing your thoughts with our prospective attendees.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm looking forward to meeting everybody. It sounds like a great conference.
Well, thanks a lot, Randy.
Thank you. Take care.